All right, welcome, guys. So thankful to be on the same team with y'all and excited to share some content today talking about how to gain the respect of your congregation, especially as a young pastor, but it works anytime. It's just 10 principles that I felt like were valuable and important for us to take a look at together. So, next week, incidentally, we have Chuck Dodd and Steve Snodgrass, and actually, not next week, sorry, next call, which we're actually not going to do 2 weeks from now because that's Easter. So, since that's usually a big day, we're going to skip a couple of weeks and all that. But so the next two calls are about hospital work and grief work, and so I'm super excited about that. So a couple of guys with a tremendous amount of experience and wisdom in that area. So looking forward to sharing that. So this week I texted a bunch of guys in the thread that we have of pastors in the Southwest Conference, and I said, if you could tell a young guy how to gain the respect of his congregation, what would you advise him to do? And I'm just going to read some of those. Todd says, be real. Don says, genuine love. Claire Sam says, preach the Bible, love people enough to pray for them, live what you preach, and take time to really know and understand the people. Those are like initial factors, he said, which is absolutely true. One of the things you got to know is that there's some things that are just a ticket to the game. It's like you don't get in the door if you don't have these things, and those are tremendous importance. Like you got to start with that. Daryl Underwood says, demonstrate that you care and be authentic. Robert says, pray for and with all people in all places in all situations with tears of sympathy and love. It's good. Todd also said, knowledge. Your people expect you to know the Bible, so you're going to have to study, study, study. And then Don also said, remember, it's also going to take time, especially in these days, which is true. Decline of institutional trust means you don't get the trust and the respect automatically anymore. It used to be you're a pastor, you get a certain measure of respect kind of automatically because the respect of the church transferred to you, and that's not really true anymore. And Aaron Johnson said, whenever I feel insecure about people's approval, I just try to remember first I'm seeking God's approval. And then Claire Sams said, another important thing is to listen. Agreed. So I've got a few things, 10 actually. So I'll try to make this fast. I've basically got 2 minutes on each one. So the first thing I want you to know, if you're taking notes, which I do have a handout that's sent in the chat, respect is not automatic, right? It's not automatic. It's earned. People say, "Oh, you got to give me respect." No, they don't. They don't. You have to earn respect, and it's something that you build slowly and lose quickly, just like trust. So trust and respect, very similar concept. You can't demand it. You really can't shortcut it. You can't just go in and be like, people are going to follow me because I have the title of pastor. You can get a certain amount of leadership and influence with just the title of pastor, but you're going to have to get past just the title, and you're going to have to get to the place where you have not just a title of pastor, a position, but you have permission. And that's where respect comes in. John Maxwell has a book called Five Levels of Leadership. I would commend it to you. And also his book, Developing the Leader Within You. Both of those have significant content that will be helpful to you about developing respect of your people. So respect is going to grow slowly over time. And real life, faithful ministry, just normal stuff is going to a lot of times give you more respect than your degree or the institution you serve or the title you have or any fancy techniques, really. It's going to be more real stuff. And so I want to give you 10 things that are important for gaining respect. Number one is respect is earned through faithfulness. It's earned through faithfulness. So if respect, in other words, it grows like a tree, not like a weed, right? Weeds grow really quick, but they don't last very long. Respect grows slowly, but it lasts a long time as long as you don't chop it down, right? So people will not usually trust you because of your gifting, just because you're decent at something. It doesn't hurt anything if you're a decent preacher. But it's not going to really necessarily gain respect because we've all seen people that were super talented but didn't deserve our respect. So, how are you going to grow through faithfulness? Well, here's some ways you can grow. You can be present at important moments, okay, funerals, hospital visits, crisis counseling. Um, Rudy Giuliani, in his book Leadership, wrote there's a profound chapter in there. Of course, Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York City when 9/11 happened. In his book Leadership, which he wrote a few years later, he included a chapter called Weddings Are Optional, Funerals Are Mandatory. And what he meant by that was that everybody wants to go to the wedding. Not everybody wants to go to the funeral, but people don't remember you were at the wedding, but they will remember you at the funeral. And so showing up at those important crisis moments, that's a powerful way to earn respect through faithfulness. Just show up, even if there's nothing you can do or nothing you can say, or you're not bringing something to the table. You showed up, and it will matter in the long run for gaining people's respect. Preach and lead with consistency, right? Consistency, even when you're discouraged, just keep going when you're discouraged. There's so many things, like I know that you may feel down, but just keep going, because faithfulness is crucial during those times when you just faithfully still bringing it. Like, I'm feeling down, but I still bring it when it comes time to preach, right? Because faithfulness, that's why. Um, the third notice there under that is keep your small promises. Um, People tend to remember when you break promises, especially, and they'll generally remember. They may not remember the specific time when you kept your promise, but it will become part of the way they think about you. And so keep your small promises. And then stay longer than average. Okay. I would just say, if you can, stay, right? A lot of respect is earned after year three. That's where a lot of respect happens. And so stay longer than average, if at all possible. Otherwise, all you're doing really is when you go through the first initial dip after a pastoral honeymoon, if you go somewhere else, you're just gaining a little respect, and then you're going to dip again, right? So just stay with it through the dip and rebuild. And so there's a lot to be said for staying. Number two, respect is earned on difficult ground.
Daryl,
Yeah,
do you mind if I say something right quick?
please. Yeah, absolutely. Jump
So
in.
as far, and I'm not trying to butt in, but I am. But
That's
as
fine.
far as keeping your promises, that can be something as small as remembering their prayer request when you get up to pray. I found that out. People want, I know it's difficult in a big church to just take all the requests, but as pastor of a small church, I found out that's one of the big things that help them know you care, is that when they tell you their granddaughter's going in for surgery, that you mention that and that you actually pray about it. Anyway,
Absolutely.
it's
No,
just
that's
a
valuable.
small
That's
thing.
super. That's really worthwhile, because it's like that relational touch, that faithfulness to remember stuff that matters. So for me, I'm not very good at remembering some of those things, and so I have to write them down, because the shortest pencil is better than the longest memory, and that's part of faithfulness, right? I'm not good at it, so I have to figure out ways to work around my not good at some things. Yeah, good point, Chuck. Thank you. People Respect is earned on difficult ground. This is a John Maxwell phrase, and it's really, really true. People watch you most closely when things go wrong, and when things are difficult and there's criticism and there's conflict, they become really testing and proving grounds for character. And you earn a lot of respect if you crumble or you lash out, you retreat, you just uh, you know give people the cold shoulder. Respect tends to go down, because it speaks of a lack of self-control, of a lack of willingness to be able to receive constructive criticism, those kinds of things. And sometimes, let's be honest, the criticism isn't always constructive. But if you respond to that with courage and with kindness and with grace, you actually build respect points. You build leadership equity and influence. So ways you can grow in this area, I've got a few suggestions there. Stay prayerful and non-reactive. Acknowledge your mistakes. Model humility. There's a lot of ways in which you can go in and say, "Hey, listen, I just want to say I blew that." And the tendency is to think that if I do that, they'll respect me less. Actually, they'll respect you more in the long run, because it takes courage, and people know that, to say, "No, I blew that. That was my mistake." And So handle criticism with emotional maturity and spiritual grounding, meaning you're grounded in your identity in Christ. You don't get your identity from those people. You don't. And so if you let them tell you who you are, and they're the most critical person in your church or whatever, um, it's not going to work well. You're going to need to be patient through those times, and so lead through the conflict. I always say you need to move toward conflict, not away from it. So I had a situation this past week, which I can't divulge, especially on a recording, but over the last 10 days, the situation developed conflict between two people in our church that involved their families. And I just started a text thread and said, hey, want to go to have a meeting about this to try to deal with it and have a conversation about it. I had 3 meetings this week about that topic. And by the grace of God, they went well. They don't always, but they went well. And ultimately, what I was reminded is move toward the conflict, not away from it, because it usually doesn't spontaneously get better. Just move in with a very grounded, centered way, and you wind up earning respect when you just come in with loving people and being easy to work with. And number 3, respect is built through displaying wisdom. Displaying wisdom. When you make good decisions, people begin to trust your judgment. So you're gonna have to figure out how to show that you are a responsible and decent person who has you're just wise. You know what to do. And so I would say one easy way to do this early on, especially as a pastor, is to make what I call high visibility, low impact changes. Okay. So if there's something you can change that's not high, it's high visibility, but it's not going to hit a lot of people, right? You don't want to come in and like ditch a bunch of programs, change a bunch of things like that. You don't have the respect built up yet to do that. So instead, you want to come in and say, there's this issue that's not very good, but a lot of people notice it or they've stopped seeing it. Fix it and show that new welcome signage, update the bulletin, fix a broken door, and that kind of stuff. People are like, hey, all right, yeah, and they start seeing that you're displaying wisdom, you're making some changes, so you're making changes and the changes that you're making are good. You gain respect a little bit each time. But choose your battles carefully in that process. If you're not sure what to do, ask a seasoned pastor or a seasoned lay leader and get some ideas of things that you could do. And that's a worthwhile thing. Number 4, respect is earned through what I'm calling in this point a non-anxious pastoral presence. And here's what I mean by that. Don't be too impressed with yourself or too worried about yourself. Right? I've seen some guys that came in and they were pretty impressed with themselves, and it didn't go well because people tend to they don't tend to respect that. Um, on the other hand, I've seen some guys come in and they couldn't take a joke, right? They couldn't take a joke about themselves. And if somebody starts just kind of ribbing people, there's different family cultures, and somebody's family culture is sarcastic and they make a little joke about you or whatever. You need to be able to laugh and say, that's a good one, and then move on. Don't be too worried about yourself. They probably don't mean anything by it. And so 90% of the time, don't be too worried about what they think of you. The ideal thing would be to not think of yourself at all. Like that's humility is not I think less of myself. It is I think of myself less. Because so you can think of yourself in pride or anxiety, and both of those are not non-anxious presence, right? And so being not impressed with yourself or too worried about yourself, a really valuable sort of thing. I'm going to keep moving for the sake of this one. I would just say, yeah, don't overreact, pause, breathe. You don't have to have an answer right this second. And you can even say, I'm going to have to think about that one. Let me get back to you. That's cool. No problem. So just be steady. My wife, actually, I'll tell you one thing. My wife and I have this saying. This is actually from a book by a guy named Chris Voss, Voss. Chris Voss wrote a book about negotiation. He was the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI for years. Now he's consultant for businesses. And he wrote a book called Never Split the Difference about negotiation. And one of his phrases that stuck with me was he said, sometimes you have to, depending on the situation, you have to go into the late night DJ voice. And he said, the late night DJ voice is this calm, very, very measured, patient, not speaking too quickly. And you go down on the end of your sentences. And he said, in that situation, and my wife, it's funny, my wife tells me, I'll get off the phone and she'll be like, somebody's having some issues. And I said, yeah. And she said, you went into the late night DJ voice. I said, yeah, I know. So it's, uh, it's something that you learn to do. If you'll do that, what actually winds up happening is you turn the temperature in the room down. So don't be a thermometer and display what the temperature is, the emotional temperature for everybody else. Be a thermostat. You decide where the temperature is and you set it, right? You pick what the temperature in the room is and the way in which we're going to approach this, even if it's a conflict situation. Number 5, respect is earned through charisma. Charisma. Now, charisma is one of those intangible, strange words. I'm using it like John Maxwell uses it in this situation. John Maxwell says charisma is the ability to focus on other people. And he said some people walk into the room and they say, "Here I am." And other people walk into the room and say, "Oh, there you are." And he said, so the ability to walk into a room and be like, "Hey, it's you." And there was a lady who sat by on back-to-back nights, sat by very famous men, two very famous men in European history. One of them was Prime Minister Disraeli, and the other, whose name I cannot remember at this moment. She sat by the two of them, and she said, I sat beside these two men, and somebody said, how were they different or the same? She said, well, the first guy, she said, by the end of the night, I thought he was the cleverest man in all England. And she said, by the end of the night, when I sat by Mr. Disraeli, she said, I thought I must be the cleverest woman in all England. And the reason was he knew how to draw out. He knew how to make them feel like, oh, that's clever. Oh, that's interesting. That's something. Charisma is presence. Like an others focused presence, right? So when you listen well and you remember people's names, you give people your attention, you wind up winning their hearts. And with those hearts comes their respect. So put your phone away when you're talking to people. Um, one of the things I regret about some of my early years as a pastor was that I did not always listen very well. And it took me longer, I think, to win respect from some people because I didn't listen super well. And so learn and use people's names, listen genuinely, don't just wait for your turn to talk. In fact, don't say everything you think, and instead learn to ask questions and elicit response from people. And in fact, when somebody says something to you, learn how to be like, that must have been difficult, or wow, that is interesting. What did you learn in that situation? Right now, you're asking for more. And after a while, they will think they are very interesting people, and that is a good thing because they tend to respect people, tend to value people who value them. So ask thoughtful questions, maybe follow up later. That's charisma. Yeah, the ability to enter a room and be others focused. Number 6, respect is earned through clear and compassionate boundaries. Clear and compassionate boundaries. Um, you're not going to be able to please everybody. And that's just 100% true. You're not going to be able to please everyone, but you can be present and be principled at the same time. And so I would encourage you to do that, to work on being actually in the present, or to be present in situations, but also to be principled, to know when you have to step back. So Jesus sometimes withdrew to lonely places and prayed. And um, so I think that it doesn't always come from being everybody's best friend. I've talked a lot about relationships and your others focused and your presence and things like that so far. So this is maybe a little bit of a balancing thing that's on the other side. You got to know your own limits and you got to model healthy balance. And people ultimately wind up respecting and admiring that. Ultimately, it may take them a little bit. So take a day off and explain to people why it matters, right? And don't respond to every late night message unless it's an emergency. I had a have a guy, you probably all got one in your church. Got a guy that calls me, used to call me late at night. One night I got a call at 12:30 at night, like it's past midnight. Get this phone call, and I picked up the phone. I keep it across the room. I walked across the room and picked up my phone. I was like, really? And I said to my wife his name. She was like, what's going on? And she said, well, you better answer it. I said, babe, not an emergency. And I'm sure of it. She said, well, it might be. It's 12:30. And so I picked it up and I answered. I said, hello. And he said, well, I just got back from OnQ. I walked down to the gas station and got me a Dr. Pepper. And I was like, and I said very kindly but firmly, I said, I was actually asleep. Please don't call me unless somebody is in the hospital. Please don't call me after 9. It's not me. I can't be kind to my family and kind to myself if that doesn't happen. Now, how you tell people is going to be dependent on who they are and what's the wisest way to handle that person. But this guy needed to hear it. And so sometimes you got to draw those lines. Now, most people are not in that situation. Show up in the important moments, but also be able to say, I am so sorry. I really wish I could. And I mean that. If I had 28 hours a day, I would show up for 4 hours more worth of stuff, but I don't. And I decided I was not going to sacrifice my wife and children on the altar of what God called me to do in ministry. And so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be present for my wife and my kids. I'm going to sometimes say, I'm sorry, I can't make it. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. So you got to let boundaries protect your ability to keep on showing up. Right. That's why it's going to matter over the course of time. So you got to earn that respect sometimes by saying no. And ultimately, people wind up respecting it in the long run. Number 7, people respect is earned through competence in the Word of God. Um, so this is where Todd was mentioning this is already on my list. He mentioned this like people expect you to know the Bible, so you got to be willing to study. You got to be willing to know an answer and to study it out. And if you don't know the answer, just tell them, I'll find out, and then go find out, right? Do that and learn it. So study deeply, preach clearly, avoid, cliches and everything. But preach solid. You don't have to be flashy, but you do have to be worth listening to, worthwhile. Like, are you saying something that matters to God? And that matters to people and that is from the Bible. You're drawing it out from the scripture, not just your own thoughts, springboarding off a chosen text, but letting the word of God speak. And so learn how you can do that, share from your own walk with God, bring fresh insights, learning that it's okay to be able to tell people, here's something I'm learning right now, or here's something I'm struggling with right now. That's perfectly fine because you're letting them see you wrestle with the word and come to conclusions. Like, I'm not sure if I've got this figured out, but here's what I'm trying. Man, I want to be that kind of person, right? So you're telling them, like, you're giving them permission to say things like that, and you're giving them permission to learn those kind of things. So really, really valuable. We'll talk more, I'm sure, about that and maybe in Q&A time. So if you guys have questions at the end, keep it in mind because I'll open it up for questions and see if there are any in just a few minutes. Number 8, respect is earned through serving willingly. Through serving willingly. In other words, leadership starts with a towel, not with a title, right? You gain more respect by cleaning up after the potluck than you do by telling people what to do. Right. So I spent the first several years of our church family, our church of ministry, just tirelessly serving and leading, serving and relating at events. Like I was the last one to eat, and I didn't eat very well at most church dinners. It's like because you're going around, I'm just stopping to talk to this person and making sure this person, because I can eat anytime. But I only have that couple hours there with my church family, not in church service, right? And I wanted to make sure that I was connecting with those people. And so um, be the person who's not afraid to humble yourself. And there's other things that can be said for not being the only guy who does clean the bathroom, right? But never, ever, ever think that you are too good for it. That's the difference, right? You've got to serve willingly, and people at some point they're like, he's willing to help, like he's a team player, and so show up early, stay late if necessary. We used to have, I'll just tell you a quick story. We gained a lot of influence with two families in our church over the course of time. And those two families, one of the families showed up 30 minutes at least early for every service. Every service. It was like automatic, going to show up 30 minutes early. The other family would stay at least an hour late. Now, they would not be on time, but they would stay at least an hour late. And that was there's another phrase, this is another John Maxwell phrase, but let me just say, John Maxwell said, when you get to the big dance, you dance with who brung you. In other words, love the people you have, not the people that you wish you had, or anything else like that. Just love the people right in front of you. And so, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next point. But a lot of times you show up early and you stay late because that's when you get a chance to connect. And you do your best to do that. Now, I talked about boundaries earlier, and this is a tension to be managed, not a problem to be solved, right? But we gained a lot of influence with those two families and kept influence with those families over the course of time, partly because we were not just looking to run out the door as soon as church was over or scraping under the wire to get there. So, all right. Number 9. Respect is earned through sincere love for your people. Sincere love for your people. They will know if you love them or if you love your position, your idea of pastoring. And so I would just say you're shepherding your people, not just an organization, right? There's a difference between those two. You're a shepherd of sheep, not just some theoretical idea of a flock. And so people can tell the difference when you are there to shepherd them. And my encouragement to you on this front would be to love the people that you have and not just your idea of people, right? You're not in love with some future version of your church people. You love them and love the people the way they are. There's a great line in the book, C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength, where this couple is talking about the weather, and they said, "Oh, my wife and I, we love weather." And he said, "You understand, not this kind of weather or that kind of weather, but just weather in general." And I would say you need to love the people that are actually in front of you. Like you be okay with not just this kind of people, that kind of people, but whatever God's given you, love those folks because that's who He's put there, and they will have their issues. They will. So love those people, not just some idea of a future version of them. So pray for people by name. Tell them when you do. Visit the sick. Show up people's ball games. Remember people's anniversaries. And let your sermons be careful about personal illustrations, but let your sermons reflect knowledge of your people's lives. I came from a community where the average income where I lived for before I moved to Oklahoma City, the average income was $85,000 a year, and that was 20 years ago. And that I moved from there to a place where there are, the average income in our area was $35,000 a year, not $85,000 a year. And and that was mostly because the people, that was a mile radius around our church, and there was some richer parts down south, right? And so when I moved here, um, I had to I had to adjust the way I thought. And the first 2 or 3 sermons, I think in the first month to 6 weeks, I mentioned when I was kind of trying to riff and create some application in preaching, I mentioned, and your 401k drops. And one of the ladies in the church said to me, "You've mentioned 401ks 2 or 3 times in the last 6 weeks, and I don't think anybody here really has one." I was like, "Ah, that's a good point." So let your sermons reflect knowledge of where your people live, not some theoretical audience that's academic or what you used to love. My wife and I left Bible college and we both liked music and we loved classic and we could sing the Messiah and we had done all this stuff and we moved to Oklahoma City and hear me, no one cared. They didn't care. They didn't care that we could sing the Messiah. They didn't care that we knew choral music. Like nobody cared. So that's fine. You've got to love who you're with, right? Number 10, respect is earned by leading with vision and hope. People respect and appreciate leaders who help them see what is possible. So be the most hopeful person in your circle of people. Be the most hopeful person. The person who can see and says, it could be that this will go well. Um, and be that guy. I just literally read today in Acts chapter 11 where Barnabas went to see what all the fuss was about in Antioch when the people got started getting saved. He went to see what all the fuss was about, and it said when he got there, he saw the grace of God and was glad and encouraged them to keep going. And it says that he did this because he was a good man, full of faith and full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a great number of people was added to the Lord. In other words, you're going to have to be Barnabases, Barnabai, whatever the correct, the correct. Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, you got to be Barnabases or Barnabai or whatever it is, um, because you want to be a person who carries that with you. When he saw the grace of God, he was glad, and I guess that's four things now. He encouraged them. So you got to be the person who does those things. Be a Barnabas. Go there, see the grace of God, be glad in your heart, and encourage them to keep going. You got to be that person. So cast a hopeful and spirit-filled vision of what the church can be. And to do that, share small wins on a regular basis. Like I used to ask people on Sunday night, I would say, in part of the sermons, I would say, we did Sunday night service, and I would say, tell me something that you saw today that made you think God's at work. And I'd just let people talk. And a lot of times it'd be something I didn't see. Like they were saying, I noticed so and so, and they were really singing today. Like, cool. I didn't notice that, but they did. And so and so, they talked to me after church and they were saying that they were reading in their Bible this week and that, man, you want to celebrate those wins. Celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. Be positive of that. So and collect those stories and tell them again, right? Tell that story again. And then you can take that positive thing that somebody said on Sunday night and you can go to that person and you can say, hey, that man, somebody told me the other day that they were just so encouraged to see you growing in the Lord and you're reading your Bible and stuff. And they were super excited about you. And I just want to say, that's me too, man. That's fantastic. You see how this like feeds? You get to be a carrier of that kind of possibility and a carrier of vision. So, uh, collect stories on purpose because you asked for them, and then tell those stories and strengthen and encourage those people. So, paint a picture of the future, right? And lead prayerfully and optimistically. And then final word is just a reminder that this is all about playing the long game. I'm going to wrap up here and I want to take any questions that you might have or feedback. But you're playing the long game. You don't have to win everybody overnight. In fact, you're probably not going to, and that's fine. That's fine. You can lose people. At the end of the first year here, we were here about 12 months and we lost. There were probably 20 people that would have called this, 25 people that would have called this their church home. We only had about 12 or 14 that were actually on any given Sunday, but probably 25 people would have called this their church home. And at the end of our first 12 months, 13 people left, and it was a little over 50% of our tithe income. It was brutal. We had some pretty sober board meetings for a while there, but the truth is, um, that you don't have to win everybody, and you don't have to keep everybody, and you just have to be faithful and stay the course. Love people, be a learner, be curious, and remember, every hard moment is a chance to earn the respect that leads to real spiritual influence in people's lives. And so hope that's helpful to you. I'm going to open it up for questions. What do you guys got? Anybody got a question or a comment? It doesn't have to be a question. Questions or comments. That's what was most surprising or helpful to you. Yeah, Lane, go ahead.
I heard you mention the pastoral honeymoon. That's a term I hadn't heard. I mean, it kind of makes sense, but could you expound a little bit more on that and what that means and what all it entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times people are just glad to have a pastor, right? Like they're glad to have a pastor, and they get to where that when you come in, they man they initially they kind of like you. I mean, they just voted for you, to come, and you may be preaching your best stuff, and all of that kind of stuff. But eventually there comes this point, just like there does in a marriage. In a marriage, there comes this point where you have to grind it out. Like you have to grow. And so I just want to encourage you to press through that. That is actually not God calling you to go somewhere else always. Not, I'm not saying it couldn't be, right? Obviously, the Lord does what he does, but a lot of times it's not God calling you to go somewhere else. It is a situation where you are just pushing through a place where you have to grind it out and grow. So my wife and I had our first real argument after we got back from our honeymoon. And the kind where you wind up crying and each of you crying, trying to figure out what in the world is, why can we not agree on this? And why are we so different? And we had to grow through that. And we're back home, right? And now it's daily and it's always. So you're not the person, you're not the guest speaker anymore. So I don't know, pastoral honeymoons, quote unquote, can last anywhere, I would say, from 6 weeks to a year and a half, something like that. But at some point, it's like, this is who we hired as our pastor, and we need to try to support him, even though I didn't enjoy the last 3 weeks of preaching. That's fine. Like it's totally fine. And so this is especially important to remember. So this is your first church, I think, Lane. So this is especially important to remember when when we remember this thing, which eventually we'll probably talk about in these calls. But the way to preach good sermons, preaching bad sermons. That's the way to preach. Like you got to preach a bunch of bad ones and then you preach good ones. And so at first maybe 1 in 10 is pretty good. And then it's 1 in 7, and then it's 1 in 5, and then it's 1 in 3. And after a while, you're like, okay, I'm finding my voice, I'm getting my groove on. That's preaching. Other times it's going to be something where you make a decision, and for the first time, people did not like the decision. And it will like it's definitely going to happen. And it's not a problem, it's normal. And so eventually you're going to make that decision. And I had a situation where I could tell you the board meeting where this one particular person's opinion of me changed, and it was like, what just happened? And it's all right. It's normal. It's normal. Don't freak out. It's just it may be that and sometimes let's be real. Sometimes you may feel a little frustrated with them too. Like that's also normal, right? That's actually pretty par for the course. So eventually it's like, I'm not sure if I 100% like these people 100% of the time anymore. And that's fine. That's okay. Uh, God didn't call you to always like them and be willing to go on vacation with them. If it keeps going, great, man, enjoy it. Fantastic. But it doesn't always, and that's fine. No problem. There's going to be times where you don't like them, but you do love them. And so you keep preaching and you keep doing right. And you keep trying to figure out how to rejoice in that and in them, and it'll grow you and make you more like Christ in the long run. So does that help?
Yeah, it does. That makes sense. I hadn't heard it that term or heard it articulated, but thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else? What do you got? What's Chuck? You're another guy with more experience on this call, so I'd welcome your feedback.
Well, my first church, Lane, I walked in and I had, let me think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people there, and 5 lasted 3 weeks and left me with 1. But that guy made it to heaven, and he passed away just recently, and God helped me while I was there, and other people did too, and eventually it did. But it was very discouraging. But I stayed there 7 years, and by the time I was done, I could go to the store in the community and know people. I was able to. You can't know your community. I agree with him. He said 3 years, but man, sometimes it seems like it's longer than that. But um, trying to think, I guess it was during ministerial a while ago, whatever, 2 weeks ago. I went into the store and saw several people I knew, just and just being in a community long enough, and then you begin to meet the needs of your community, meet the needs of the people that are around you, and God will help you through that to build your church because you become their pastor before they ever come to your church.
Yeah.
That's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's that. I'm with you, Chucky. I know I mentioned 3 years, but the truth is that I feel like some of my better work came after seven, after 7 years. And and I do know that there was like in preaching as I kind of grew, there was a big shift after 1 year, approximately. And toward the end of that first year, I found like, okay, I can do this kind of sermon. And then there was another one about 5 years in, and then one more about 10 years in, where I kind of developed and reached a new level. So yeah, just want to encourage you to just keep trusting the Lord and keep moving forward because it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so yeah, and Chucky, that's beautiful, man. The guy made it to heaven, and you made a lot of connections in the community. I run into people now on a regular basis that used to attend my church, right? Like it definitely happens. There's community people that I run into that I was in their life or they were in my life for a while, and I but you know what? A while back, I had a guy that 8 years after he left my church, he called me in California. He was a kid when he left. His dad and his parents kind of moved away and to a different part of the city, and they didn't attend anymore. And he called me 8 years later, and he had gone into the Marines and he got out. Now he had a job and now he's dating this girl, and he was like he was looking for God, and he looked me up, found my number, and I was the only person he knew to call that knew something about the Lord. And so he called and we talked, and I sent him some discipleship materials, and he started listening and and it it absolutely he texted me again. This has been like 3 years ago when that happened. He texted me again a couple days ago, and he said, "Hey, I just want to let you know I'm involved in a church here, and I'm doing it." He said, and I trace all of it back to like I called you that day, and you prayed with me, and you started helping me learn how to study the Bible. And he said, and God's just done so much in my life. He doesn't live here. He's never going to go to my church, at least not right now. Do you know what his brother did? Forgot this. Yeah, so his brother a while back started coming to church. His brother and his wife. And their little kid. So anyway, there's you stay 20 years and you start seeing things, these big movements, cycles and stuff. So, any other questions you guys got? All
Well,
right. What do we got?
I've
Yeah, Jim,
always
go
said
ahead.
you're fine. I've always said the honeymoon stage is when it's wonderful until it isn't.
Yep.
But one thing I will share, and I don't necessarily need feedback right now, but I'm curious what your thoughts would be. And definitely, this is where listen comes into play. But I'm finding that some things, people are wired different. Some things earn respect faster or take it away faster with
Right.
different people. And so, our last church, it was, you're a young guy. We want you to preach. We want you to lead our church in the areas we feel it works, but we don't want you to be the guy. This church, it's been a weird adjustment because you're the guy. And so, how to find the balance between
Yeah.
being the guy when they want you to be and not being the guy when they don't want you to be. And
Yeah.
they're curious if you have any feedback on that. And again, I don't expect it right now, but
Sure. So by that, let me try to ask a question, just double click a little bit. By that, do you mean where are your boundaries about leadership and leading, and how strong should you push, or do you mean like how much to involve other people, or how rapidly and enthusiastically to lead forward? What does that mean to you?
Um, yeah, definitely those would kind of come into play, but also kind of thinking for some of these young guys, and God forbid that they should move on. We want them to retire where they're at. But if something happens and a few years down the road do go to a different church, just understanding that the culture is different, the mindset's different, and what worked at your previous church won't always work at the next one, kind of thing. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I hear that. So I think, and Chuck, you feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts here, but I think that when people um, are asking for your leadership, and they're asking for you to, hey, what ideas do you have? What would you like to do? Man, enjoy that, and maybe test out, and feel free, keep staying curious about what they mean and what they're thinking. Um, so there's a story, John Maxwell, because this kind of stuff, he's just so quotable and relatable on. John Maxwell says, I never was the primary leader at my first church in Hillham, Indiana. He said, the primary guy who had all the influence was a guy named Claude, who's a farmer. And he said, Claude was the guy. He said, I had my first board meeting and I just wanted to see who the leader was. And he said, so I sat down with the board and I said, anybody got anything that any issues you need to raise? It's something that needs to be done around here. And he said, I watched everybody's eyes and everybody looked at Claude. And he said, Claude said, yeah, I noticed there's a broken window down in the church basement over there. And he said, hey, Benny, you still have that extra glass over there? And yeah, I got that glass, some panes of glass. And he said, well, John, you're a pretty good glazer. You mind doing that this week? And John said, yeah, Claude, I can take care of that. Maxwell said, all right, anything else? All right, well, let's do that this week, and we'll see what's next. And he said, now I knew who the leader was. And he said, so I'd go out and bale hay with Claude. And he said, I'd go out and I'd bale hay with him for a while. And he said, I'd work with him for an hour, and then we'd be sweating and whatever. And he said, I'd turn around and say, hey, Claude, I've been thinking. And he said, and I would share an idea I had. And what do you think? Do you think that would be something that would be workable? And he said, sometimes Claude would say, well, yeah, I think that might be something good. And he said, then I'd go back to the board meeting and I say, Claude and I were talking, and we think, and it's a matter of keeping people aware of what's going on, finding the boundaries, staying curious about what they're thinking and what they're looking for. And then, man, as hard and as fast as you want to work, go for it. Go for it. Go as fast and as far as they'll let you go on those kind of things. It will not last forever, but if you're a hard worker and you're faithful to the things and you show wisdom and you keep people informed and keep them in the loop and stay curious about things like that, you'll be amazed how far you can go. If you want a book that's very fascinating, read about this. There's a book by David Marquette called Turn This Ship Around. And it is a story of a leadership turnaround on the worst performing nuclear submarine in the United States Navy, that became the best performing nuclear submarine in the fleet. And um, he tells the story of how he did that. And there's some really profound leadership lessons in it. And one of them is he talks about curiosity. He said, I was not, because I had to take this position quickly. He said, I did not come in as the expert. I came in as the learner. And he said, it totally changed the environment, because I was coming in saying, okay, so what about this? Why do you guys do that? Can you tell me about this? And he said, it changed the environment, and they owned it all of a sudden. And brilliant point for church ministry. And so, as much as possible, give people the option to continue to give you feedback and solicit that and those kinds of things. So Good question. What else? What else you got?
One thing I thought he was talking about going to a church where some churches let you lead, some churches you're going to have to do like you said, but some of that may be a reaction to you may have to live down a previous pastor's leadership
Yeah.
to gain respect, because they may have a pendulum. They may have had an overbearing someone who was domineering, and so they are not going to allow that to happen again.
Yeah.
And so that pendulum effect may affect you, and it may not be your fault. It may be nothing that you did.
That is such a great point. The guy you follow does make a big difference on that. And sometimes people are hurting, right? Because they're hurting for what, or they're scared, right? And a lot of times, so Marcus Buckingham in his book, The One Thing, it's about leading or whatever. He said the one thing you need to know for leadership, for good leadership, is is that your people are anxious, and if you'll help them have a sense of someone is leading and it's going to be okay. Like they're going to take care of them. They're not against me. They're not going to be stupid. They're not going to blow this thing up. It's what I call a steady hand on the wheel. It's like, okay, there's faithfulness, there's a steady hand on the wheel where that kind of presence sometimes matters a lot. And you get to be patient with people and be like, oh, that's okay. I don't have to do anything dramatic. Other times, if they'll let you do something dramatic and you're like, what if we took out all the pews and put in bean bags? And they're like, sure, well then, hey, go find something worthwhile to do and do it. But a lot of times that's not the case, and that's just feeling the individual situation. So, all right, guys, it is 2 minutes till, and I'm going to wrap it up right here because we promised we would always be done as fast as possible. And so I'm going to give you actually a sermon since you're here. A sermon that I preached that is a sermon about Jesus and his kingdom. And so I'm going to put it in the chat. And so this is called A Different Kind of King. And so I promised we would always have some sort of sermon for you to be able to share that. And so that is a excuse me. That is a sermon that you can use at some point in the future. Feel free to do it. Don't quote me or say feel like you need to give credit to anything. Just go preach it and use it. So hope that is a helpful thing, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks a lot.